New Year's is for fresh starts, but for these guys, the only thing dropping at midnight was their life expectancy. This is weapons-grade stupidity meeting physics. While you toasted the future, they improvised ways to become history. Warning: do not attempt. Darwin loves a holiday special. Here are 10 people who canceled their life subscription early. 1. Have you ever been so confident in yourself that you forgot to check if the laws of physics were on your side? Well, let me introduce you to our first contestant in tonight's parade of poor decisions. It was December 31st, somewhere in the frozen wastelands of Minnesota, where the temperature had plummeted to a bone-chilling minus 20 degrees Celsius. That's the kind of cold where your nose hairs freeze the moment you step outside and where, most importantly, lakes turn into giant, unforgiving slabs of concrete. But our hero, let's call him Chad, because of course his name was Chad, didn't let minor details like the fundamental state of water interrupt his plans for glory. Chad was what scientists would classify as a hold-my-beer specimen, a subspecies of human male characterized by an inverse relationship between confidence and common sense. He'd spent the entire evening at a lakeside cabin party, consuming enough alcohol to pickle a small elephant, and loudly announcing to anyone within earshot that he was going to perform a legendary polar plunge to ring in the new year. Now, a polar plunge involves jumping into freezing cold water as a test of toughness. The key word here is water, the liquid stuff that yields when you hit it. But Chad treated the concept of checking conditions the same way he treated the terms of service on his phone apps, completely ignored. His friends, bless their equally intoxicated hearts, were too busy filming on their phones to point out the obvious: that the lake hadn't been liquid since mid-November and was currently sporting a 25-centimeter thick layer of ice that could support a pickup truck. As the countdown to midnight began, Chad stripped down to his boxers, flexed for the cameras like he was auditioning for a protein powder commercial, and sprinted down the wooden dock with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever chasing a tennis ball. "Cannonball!" he screamed, launching himself into the air with impressive height and absolutely zero survival instincts. What happened next was a masterclass in Newtonian physics. You see, when a 90-kilogram object traveling at roughly 15 kilometers per hour meets an immovable surface of solid ice, the ice doesn't politely step aside. Chad didn't break through the frozen surface like some majestic polar bear. Instead, he bounced. The impact was described by witnesses as sounding like someone dropping a watermelon onto a marble floor, which, anatomically speaking, wasn't far from the truth. His skull fractured on first contact, his spine compressed like a chaotic accordion, and his pelvis shattered into what the coroner later described as a medical jigsaw puzzle. The lake, in its frozen indifference, didn't even crack. Chad's body just lay there on the ice, a steaming heap of broken ambitions and shattered vertebrae, while his friends' phones captured every glorious second for posterity. By the time paramedics arrived, the scene was calm, quiet, and absolutely freezing. They didn't have to fish him out of the water, they just had to collect him from the surface. The official cause of death was listed as multiple blunt force trauma, consistent with high-velocity impact against a solid surface. But everyone at the party knew the real cause: terminal stupidity combined with a complete failure to perform basic environmental assessment. Chad's last words, captured forever on 6 different smartphone videos that would later go viral, were, "This is gonna be epic." And you know what? In a way, he was right. His frozen faceplant became the most watched New Year's fail video of the year, racking up 12 million views and spawning countless memes. The lake, meanwhile, remained frozen and completely unbothered, silently waiting for its next victim to mistake it for a swimming pool. 2. The humble firework mortar, a tube designed to launch explosive projectiles into the sky, where they can safely detonate hundreds of feet above the heads of spectators. The key engineering principle here, and I really want you to pay attention because our next protagonist certainly didn't, is that the tube stays on the ground while the explosive goes up. This is not a complicated concept. Toddlers understand this. Dogs understand this. Apparently, however, Daniel did not understand this. It was a 4th of July party that had somehow merged with a New Year's celebration because, as Daniel explained to everyone, America doesn't take holidays from being awesome. Daniel was the kind of guy who peaked in high school, specifically during the one football game where he scored a touchdown because the opposing team's defense literally tripped over each other. He'd been coasting on that glory ever since, convinced that the universe owed him constant opportunities for greatness. His friends had long ago learned to maintain a safe perimeter whenever Daniel announced he had an idea, which he did approximately every 45 minutes after his third drink. Tonight's idea was a real showstopper. "Bet you $20 I can launch this mortar off my head," Daniel announced, hoisting a professional-grade firework tube that was clearly labeled "Place on flat ground, stand back 50 feet," in letters large enough to be read from space. His friends' protests were immediate and emphatic. "Dude, absolutely not. That's literally insane. Your head is not a launching pad." But Daniel heard something different. He heard a challenge. He heard the universe once again trying to hold him back from his destiny. "Watch and learn, cowards," he declared, placing the mortar tube directly on top of his skull like the world's most explosive party hat. Now, let's talk physics for a moment, because Newton's third law was about to make a very dramatic appearance. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. When a mortar shell launches upward with enough force to reach 300 feet in the sky, that exact same force pushes downward. On a stable surface like the ground, this force is absorbed harmlessly. On a human neck, which evolution specifically did not design to be a rocket launch platform, this force does something very different. Daniel lit the fuse with a dramatic flourish, turning to grin at the camera his buddy was holding. "Happy New," he began. He never finished the sentence. The mortar ignited, and in the span of approximately 0.3 seconds, several things happened simultaneously. First, the downward thrust of the launch snapped Daniel's cervical vertebrae like dry spaghetti, killing him instantly. Second, the shell launched upward with catastrophic force directly through Daniel's position. Third, the shell exploded at approximately 8 feet of altitude instead of 300, and Daniel, who had been standing directly in the blast zone, simply ceased to exist as a functional human being. The camera recorded the flash, the bang, and then nothing but smoke where Daniel used to be. The camera, still recording, captured the whole thing in horrifying high definition. Daniel's body crumpled to the ground like a marionette with cut strings, still technically wearing the firework tube as history's worst hat. His friends' screams were drowned out by the continuing fireworks display overhead, creating a surreal soundtrack of celebration and carnage. The police report later noted, with what one can only assume was professional restraint, that the deceased had failed to follow manufacturer safety guidelines. The firework company, when contacted by local news, released a statement that simply read, "Our products include extensive safety warnings. We cannot account for customers who choose to ignore them." Daniel did achieve a form of immortality that night. He became a cautionary tale shared in fireworks safety presentations across the country, his faceless silhouette forever demonstrating what not to do. The video was removed from social media within hours, but lives on in the darker corners of the internet, a permanent monument to the question, what could possibly go wrong? 3. Picture this. A suburban garage in Ohio decorated with sagging streamers and a banner that reads, "New Year, New Me," in what appears to be hastily applied spray paint. The year is about to change, the guests are getting restless, and there's a crisis brewing, literally. The keg, that sacred altar of American party culture, has stopped cooperating. Instead of dispensing golden, delicious beer, it's producing nothing but foam and disappointment. Enter our hero, a 26-year-old amateur engineer named Kevin, who was about to demonstrate why air quotes belong around that job title. Kevin had taken exactly 1 semester of mechanical engineering before switching to business administration. But that single semester had left him with a dangerous combination. Just enough knowledge to be creative, and nowhere near enough to understand consequences. "The problem," Kevin announced to the frustrated crowd, "is pressure. The hand pump is weak. What we need is real pressure." His eyes drifted to the corner of the garage, where his father's industrial air compressor sat like a sleeping dragon. This particular compressor was used for operating pneumatic tools, nail guns, impact wrenches, equipment designed to punch through metal and concrete. It could generate pressures exceeding 8 atmospheres, roughly the same pressure you'd find 250 feet underwater. A standard beer keg, for reference, is designed to handle about 2 atmospheres. But Kevin didn't know this because Kevin had switched to business administration. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing," Kevin said. The last words spoken by approximately 60% of Darwin Award recipients throughout history. He disconnected the keg from its wimpy hand pump and attached the industrial compressor hose with the confidence of a man who had never once Googled keg pressure limits. The compressor roared to life, and for a beautiful moment, it seemed like Kevin's plan was working. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. 2 atmospheres, 3, 4. Beer began flowing freely from the tap, and the crowd cheered. Kevin beamed with pride, not noticing that the keg had begun to groan, a metallic warning sound that anyone with actual engineering knowledge would have recognized as imminent catastrophic failure. At 6 atmospheres, the keg started to bulge slightly. At 7, small seams began to weep pressurized beer like metallic tears. At 8 atmospheres, physics delivered its final verdict. The bottom of the keg, unable to contain forces it was never designed to handle, blew out with the velocity of a cannon shot. The keg itself, now essentially a steel rocket with an open bottom, launched upward with tremendous force. Kevin, who had been leaning over the tap to pour himself the first victory beer, was directly in the launch path. The rim of the keg caught him directly under the chin with the force of a car crash, snapping his head backward with enough violence to kill him instantly. The keg continued its trajectory into the garage ceiling, where it embedded itself as a permanent reminder of the night's festivities, where it would remain as a grim decoration for the next 3 hours until emergency services could safely remove it. The garage looked like a crime scene designed by an alcoholic. Beer-soaked walls splattered with considerably more than just beer. Traumatized party guests covered in foam and worse. And Kevin, or what remained of him, sprawled across the concrete floor. The compressor, completely indifferent to the chaos it had helped create, continued running until someone thought to unplug it. The police report described the scene as the most preventable fatality the responding officers had witnessed in their combined 40 years of service. The keg company's lawyers were reportedly seen doing a happy dance when they confirmed their product included warnings against modifying or overpressurizing the container. 4. Patience is a virtue, one that Marcus had apparently traded at birth for a lifetime supply of impulsive decisions and an unshakable belief that rules were suggestions meant for lesser people. On New Year's Eve, this particular character flaw would cost him everything. The setting was a luxury high-rise in downtown Miami, where Marcus's girlfriend was waiting on the rooftop along with 200 other partygoers, champagne in hand, countdown minutes away. Marcus had planned this night for months. The perfect proposal, the perfect moment, the perfect kiss at midnight. The ring was in his pocket, his heart was racing, and absolutely nothing was going to stop him. Until the elevator decided otherwise. At exactly 11:58 p.m., somewhere between the 14th and 15th floors, the car shuddered to a halt. The lights flickered. A mechanical groan echoed through the shaft, and then silence. Marcus stood frozen for approximately 3 seconds before the panic set in. No, 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 no! He jabbed every button on the panel with increasing desperation. The emergency call button produced nothing but static. His phone showed 0 signal. The shaft was a cellular dead zone. Above him, muffled through concrete and steel, he could hear the distant thump of party music, the crowd probably already beginning their countdown. Rachel was up there. The ring was in his pocket. And he was stuck in a metal box, missing the most important moment of his carefully planned life. What Marcus should have done was wait. Elevator malfunctions are almost always minor, and rescue typically arrives within 30 minutes. The building had protocols, backup systems, trained maintenance staff on call. Patience would have saved his life. But Marcus had never been patient, and tonight, with everything on the line, he made the decision that would define and end his existence. He pried open the interior elevator doors with his bare hands, a feat of adrenaline-fueled strength that revealed a concrete wall with a narrow gap at the top. The entrance to the 15th floor, tantalizingly close, maybe 2 feet above the stuck elevator's ceiling. He could see the hallway lights through the crack. He could hear the party. All he had to do was climb. Marcus hauled himself up through the emergency hatch onto the roof of the elevator car. The shaft was dark, industrial, humming with the dormant energy of machinery waiting to restart. Warning signs covered every surface. Danger. Authorized personnel only. Risk of death. But Marcus processed these the same way he processed speed limits, as suggestions for cowards. He positioned himself at the gap between the elevator roof and the 15th floor entrance, a space of about 18 inches. Tight, but manageable. He wedged his upper body through, arms reaching for the marble hallway floor, fingers scraping for purchase. His chest cleared the gap. His waist followed. He was almost there, almost free, almost the hero of his own proposal story. And that's when the elevator's automated diagnostic system completed its reset. The fault had been minor. A sensor glitch, a momentary hiccup in the building's aging electrical system. The computer determined all systems were nominal and issued the command to resume normal operation. The elevator didn't ask if anyone was in the way. It simply moved. Marcus heard the machinery engage, a deep mechanical hum that vibrated through the shaft. And in that moment, he understood exactly what was about to happen. He tried to pull himself through faster, tried to kick free, tried to do anything except what physics had already determined was inevitable. The elevator car rose with 30,000 pounds of hydraulic force, and Marcus was caught in a space that was rapidly becoming smaller. The compression was total and instant. The gap that had been 18 inches became 12, then 6, then nothing at all. His ribs shattered inward. His spine compressed beyond any survivable limit. His lungs collapsed before he could even scream. The elevator continued upward, completely indifferent to the obstruction it had just eliminated, carrying its grim evidence toward the penthouse. Rachel waited on the rooftop until 12:47 a.m., checking her phone every few minutes, wondering why Marcus wasn't responding. The proposal never happened. The ring was recovered from his pocket by the coroner, still in its velvet box, completely undamaged. The building settled quietly with Marcus's family and installed new sensors designed to detect shaft obstructions. The elevator was taken out of service permanently, though maintenance workers claim they sometimes hear phantom button presses late at night. The ghost of a man who just couldn't wait. 5. Some people look at store-bought party supplies and see perfectly adequate celebration accessories. Others look at them and see a challenge, a personal insult from the consumer goods industry suggesting that they lack the creativity and ambition to make something better. Kyle was firmly in the second category. Kyle was a DIY enthusiast, in the same way that a forest fire is a campfire enthusiast, technically related to the concept, but operating on a scale that guaranteed destruction. His garage was a monument to projects that had gone terribly wrong. A custom motorcycle that had never actually run, a hot tub installation that had flooded his basement, and a homemade fireworks launcher that had previously hospitalized his neighbor. But Kyle never learned from his mistakes, because learning from mistakes requires admitting you made them, and Kyle had never admitted to being wrong about anything in his 34 years of existence. Store-bought confetti poppers are pathetic, Kyle announced to his New Year's Eve guests, holding up a small cardboard tube that produced a modest spray of paper when activated. This is what we're going to use instead. He unveiled his masterpiece with the pride of a man who genuinely believed he was about to revolutionize the party supply industry. A massive metal cylinder that he called the Mega Cannon, stuffed with enough explosive material and metallic glitter to guarantee what he promised would be the most epic confetti blast in history. What Kyle didn't understand, and what anyone with even basic knowledge of physics would have immediately recognized, was that he hadn't built a confetti launcher. He had built a bomb. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, an actual explosive device, constructed with the same basic principles that make pipe bombs so devastatingly effective. You see, when you pack explosive material into a sealed metal container and ignite it, the rapidly expanding gases have nowhere to go. Pressure builds exponentially until it exceeds the structural integrity of the container, at which point the container doesn't pop, it detonates. The metal casing fragments into shrapnel, traveling at velocities comparable to actual military ordnance. Kyle had essentially assembled a weapon of war and convinced himself it was a party favor. The fact that he added glitter to the mix didn't make it festive, it made it festive and lethal. "Stand back, everyone! This is gonna be awesome!" Kyle shouted, positioning himself directly behind his creation like a proud father at a science fair, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing in what bomb disposal experts would call the kill zone. His guests, positioned approximately 15 feet away, well within the blast radius, raised their phones to capture the magic. The fuse burned for exactly 4 seconds. Kyle, still grinning, never even had time to register that something was wrong. The device didn't launch confetti toward the ceiling in a beautiful arc. It exploded. The blast was heard 6 blocks away. Neighbors initially thought a gas main had ruptured. The metal cylinder fragmented into dozens of pieces of jagged shrapnel, each traveling outward at lethal velocity. Kyle, standing directly behind ground zero, absorbed the majority of the blast. The force threw him backward into his own garage door, with enough violence to leave a dent, and by the time his body hit the ground, there was nothing left to save. 3 guests in the front row sustained serious injuries from secondary shrapnel. The glitter, ironically, did survive. It was found embedded in trees, fence posts, and surfaces up to 70 feet from the blast site, sparkling cheerfully in the emergency responders' flashlights like the world's most macabre craft project. The ATF was called to investigate, initially suspecting terrorism before the surviving guests explained that no, this was just Kyle being Kyle. His death certificate listed the cause as explosive trauma, but everyone who knew him understood the real cause: a lethal combination of arrogance, craft supplies, and a complete inability to recognize when a DIY project had crossed the line from ambitious to accidentally building an improvised explosive device. The internet later immortalized Kyle with the caption, "He wanted to make the party go off with a bang. He succeeded." 6. Alcohol does many things to the human brain. It lowers inhibitions, impairs judgment, and, most dangerously, convinces ordinary people that they are secretly action heroes. Nowhere is this phenomenon more clearly demonstrated than in the tragic case of Bradley, a 31-year-old insurance adjuster who, on New Year's Eve, decided that his true calling was to become a chandelier swinging legend. The setting was the Grand Meridian Hotel, a 5-star establishment featuring a stunning 9-story atrium, crowned by a crystal chandelier that cost more than most houses. The chandelier was a masterpiece of engineering and art. 3,000 hand-cut crystals, 18-karat gold fixtures, and a total weight of approximately 800 pounds, suspended by a system of cables and anchors that were designed to support the fixture itself, and absolutely nothing else. Bradley had consumed 7 cocktails, 4 shots, and what he described as a lot of champagne, probably. He had also consumed a lifetime of action movies, Tarzan cartoons, and a deep-seated need to be the center of attention. As the midnight countdown began, Bradley spotted the chandelier glittering above the atrium like a crystalline invitation. "I'm gonna swing from that," he announced to his horrified girlfriend. "Babe, please don't," she pleaded. "That's literally insane." "Insanely awesome," Bradley corrected, already climbing over the 3rd-floor balcony railing. The crowd below had no idea what was happening until Bradley launched himself into the void with a yell that was half Tarzan, half terrified realization that he had made a serious miscalculation. For approximately 1.5 seconds, it actually worked. Bradley's hands closed around a golden support arm, and he swung outward in a glorious arc while the crowd gasped. Then physics, which had been waiting patiently, presented its invoice. 800 pounds of chandelier plus 190 pounds of Bradley, plus the momentum of his swing equaled forces that the ceiling anchors were never designed to handle. The sound was like a gunshot, the main support cable snapping under the strain. Then came a groan of tearing plaster, a rain of dust and debris, and finally the chandelier itself, pulling free from its century-old mounting with almost graceful inevitability. Bradley wrote it down like the world's most expensive and final amusement park ride. The fall from the atrium ceiling to the marble lobby floor took approximately 2 seconds, during which Bradley had just enough time to experience the full spectrum of human emotion: exhilaration, confusion, terror, and finally, acceptance. The impact was catastrophic. 800 pounds of crystal and metal crashed onto the lobby floor with Bradley somewhere underneath, his body simultaneously crushed by the weight and impaled by dozens of broken crystal shards. But the chandelier, in its final act of revenge, had one more surprise. The electrical wiring, never designed to be stress-tested by falling, remained live. The exposed wires made contact with the metal frame, with the crystal-embedded Bradley, and with the spreading pool of liquid that was accumulating around the wreckage. Witnesses reported seeing Bradley's body convulse with the electrical discharge, a grotesque puppet dance that continued until a quick-thinking hotel employee located the circuit breaker. The final death certificate listed multiple causes: blunt force trauma, penetrating injuries from crystal shards, and electrocution. It was, the coroner noted with dark humor, an impressively thorough way to die. The hotel's insurance company paid out the largest single claim in their history, covering the chandelier replacement, the structural repairs, the PTSD counseling for approximately 40 witnesses, and the settlement to Bradley's family. The new chandelier, installed 6 months later, features a small plaque that reads, "Please admire from ground level only." 7. Laziness has killed more people than most diseases, and our next story is a perfect case study in how the simple desire to avoid minor discomfort can result in maximum consequences. Meet Tyler, a 28-year-old whose life philosophy could be summarized as "why do things correctly when you can do them conveniently?" It was New Year's Eve in Chicago, where the temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero with wind chill, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache and your motivation evaporate. Tyler had purchased a professional-grade firework rocket for the occasion, a beautiful artillery shell that promised a spectacular aerial display. The problem was that launching it properly would require going outside, finding an open area, setting up a stable launch tube, and standing in the freezing cold for at least 10 minutes. Tyler looked at the thermometer, looked at the firework, and made a decision that would be his last. "I'll just launch it from the balcony," he announced to his roommate, who immediately suggested this was a terrible idea. "It's literally a 10-second thing," Tyler argued. "Light it, whoosh, done. I'll be back inside before I even get cold." His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a 4-story building, featuring a small balcony with a notable architectural feature that Tyler had apparently never noticed in his 2 years of living there: a solid concrete ceiling, courtesy of the 4th floor's balcony directly above. This ceiling hung approximately 8 feet over Tyler's balcony floor, creating what firefighters would later describe as an enclosed launch space, and what physicists would call a guaranteed ricochet zone. Tyler stepped outside in shorts and a t-shirt, because, in his mind, this was only going to take a moment. He propped the rocket in an empty wine bottle, ignoring the launch tube that came with the fireworks specifically because engineers understand that stable launches require stable platforms, and positioned it at what he eyeballed as straight up. His angle was off by about 15 degrees, aimed directly at the concrete ceiling above. The fuse sparked to life, and for one beautiful second, everything seemed fine. The rocket ignited with a satisfying whoosh, trailing sparks as it climbed toward the sky, and directly into 8 inches of solid concrete. The impact didn't stop the rocket, it redirected it. The projectile bounced off the ceiling at a sharp angle, now traveling horizontally and downward, punching through the sliding glass door and entering Tyler's apartment like a heat-seeking missile of poor decisions. Tyler, demonstrating the quick reflexes of someone who had just realized they'd made a catastrophic error, dove behind his couch. This was, unfortunately, exactly where the rocket had decided to detonate. The explosion was contained within the apartment, which actually made things worse. In an open field, an explosion disperses. In a living room, the pressure waves bounce off the walls, magnifying the destruction. The blast shattered every window, set fire to the curtains and carpet, and filled the space with thick, toxic smoke in seconds. Tyler survived the initial blast but was disoriented and trapped in a rapidly burning room. He collapsed 6 feet from the front door. Overcome by smoke inhalation from the burning synthetic materials, he had been too lazy to leave. His roommate, who had retreated to the bathroom the moment Tyler announced his plan, survived by sealing the door with wet towels. Pure luck and a healthy fear of Tyler's ideas saved his life. The fire department's report noted that the fireworks packaging included 17 separate warnings about proper launching procedures, all of which Tyler ignored because walking to the park seemed like too much effort. His death certificate listed smoke inhalation and thermal burns as the cause, but everyone understood the real culprit: a lethal combination of laziness and a complete failure to understand basic geometry. The building management added explicit language to every lease about fireworks being prohibited, though they admitted they never thought such a rule needed to be written down until Tyler proved them wrong. 8. There's a certain type of person who can't leave well enough alone. Someone who looks at a perfectly functional system and thinks, yes, but what if I made it extreme? Our next story features exactly this kind of individual. A 26-year-old lab technician named Craig, who had access to dangerous materials, a rudimentary understanding of chemistry, and zero ability to recognize when cleverness had crossed the line into catastrophe. Craig worked at a pharmaceutical research facility where he had unfettered access to various laboratory supplies, including liquid nitrogen. For those unfamiliar, liquid nitrogen is nitrogen gas cooled to minus 196 degrees Celsius, cold enough to flash freeze biological tissue on contact, cold enough to make steel as brittle as glass, and cold enough to do truly spectacular things to sealed containers of carbonated liquid. Craig knew this. In fact, Craig was counting on it for his New Year's Eve party trick. Regular chilled champagne is boring, Craig explained to his girlfriend as he loaded a Magnum bottle into a cooler filled with liquid nitrogen. This is going to be instantly cold. Like the coldest champagne anyone has ever experienced. People are going to lose their minds. What Craig failed to consider, despite his supposed scientific background, was the fundamental physics of what happens when you seal a container of liquid and then rapidly change its temperature. The champagne, already pressurized with dissolved carbon dioxide, was now being subjected to extreme cold. As liquid nitrogen evaporated into gas, some of that nitrogen began seeping into microscopic imperfections in the glass bottle. The champagne itself, attempting to freeze, was expanding against a container that was becoming increasingly brittle and increasingly pressurized. The bottle, in essence, was becoming a glass bomb. Craig retrieved the bottle at 11:59 p.m., excited to pop the cork at the stroke of midnight. The glass was so cold it burned his hands, but he was too committed to the bit to let go. Steam rose from the bottle's surface as it contacted the warm room air. Inside, pressures that would be more appropriate for industrial equipment were straining against Victorian-era glassmaking technology. "Okay, everyone raise your glasses," Craig announced, lifting the Magnum above his head in triumph. The countdown reached 3, 2, 1. The bottle didn't pop. It detonated. The explosion was remarkably violent for something that had started as a celebration beverage. The glass fragmented into hundreds of razor-sharp projectiles, propelled outward by the escaping gases at velocities that would impress a ballistics expert. Craig, positioned directly above the epicenter of the blast, caught the majority of the shrapnel in his face, neck, and chest. Multiple shards found their mark in his neck and chest, and Craig crumpled to the floor before anyone could even process what had happened. He was gone in seconds, the kind of instant death that leaves a room frozen in disbelief rather than screaming. The noise was deafening, a crack followed by a roar of escaping pressure and the sound of glass embedding itself in walls, furniture, and human flesh. 3 other guests sustained serious injuries from secondary shrapnel. Craig was dead before he hit the ground, his expression frozen in what witnesses described as genuine surprise, as if the laws of thermodynamics had personally betrayed him. The liquid nitrogen, now rapidly evaporating at room temperature, created an eerie fog that rolled across the floor of the apartment, adding a haunting visual element to the carnage. First responders initially suspected some kind of terrorist attack before survivors explained that no, this was just an extremely ill-conceived attempt to make champagne colder. Craig's employer, when contacted about the missing liquid nitrogen, immediately implemented new inventory controls and a mandatory safety review for all laboratory personnel. His death was eventually cited in a revised company policy specifically prohibiting employees from removing hazardous materials from the facility, a rule that apparently needed to be stated explicitly because Craig had proven that common sense could not be assumed. 9. Every generation has its own version of vehicular stupidity, activities that seem like good ideas only when the brain has been thoroughly marinated in alcohol and peer pressure. For Generation Z, one of these activities is car surfing. the practice of standing on the roof of a moving vehicle while pretending to be a movie stunt performer instead of a physics experiment waiting to happen. Our next contestant, a 23-year-old named Jason, was about to become a particularly instructive example of why this activity has a mortality rate that would make bungee jumping look like a spa treatment. It was 12:03 a.m. on New Year's Day, and Jason's group of friends had decided to celebrate by conducting a mobile noise parade through their suburban neighborhood. The vehicle of choice was a lifted SUV belonging to Jason's buddy Brandon, and the passenger manifest included 5 intoxicated young men, various noisemakers, and a catastrophically bad decision about to be made. "Dude, get on the roof," someone shouted. "Bang the pots while we drive. It'll be like Times Square but better." Jason, whose blood alcohol content would later be measured at 3 times the legal limit, found this logic unassailable. He climbed out the rear window, scrambled onto the roof of the moving SUV, and stood triumphantly in the wind, banging a cooking pot with a metal spoon and screaming "Happy New Year" at every house they passed. For approximately 90 seconds, it was everything Jason had hoped for. The wind in his hair, the adulation of his equally drunk friends, the satisfying clang of pot-on-spoon percussion. He was a legend. He was invincible. He was about to become a cautionary tale told at driver's education classes for the next decade. Tyler, who was driving, was only slightly less intoxicated than his roof-mounted friend. His attention was split between the road, the celebration inside the vehicle, and the phone he was using to film Jason's performance for what he assumed would be social media glory. He did not see the traffic light ahead turn red. He did not see the minivan stopped at the intersection, a family returning home from their own New Year's celebration. He saw these things only at the very last second when his options had narrowed to slam the brakes or plow into a vehicle full of innocent people. He chose the brakes. The SUV decelerated from 45 miles per hour to 0 in approximately 2 seconds. Jason, standing unsecured on the roof with no handhold and no friction to speak of, did not decelerate. Newton's first law, an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an external force, took over with ruthless efficiency. Jason launched forward off the roof like a human cannonball, still clutching his cooking pot, still wearing an expression of celebration rather than terror, because his alcohol-soaked brain hadn't caught up to his body's sudden change in trajectory. He covered approximately 50 feet through the air, a parabolic arc that would have been almost beautiful if it didn't terminate in disaster. Witnesses described it as watching a rag doll being thrown by an invisible giant. His landing zone turned out to be a concrete light pole at the corner of the intersection, which he struck headfirst at an angle that guaranteed instantaneous results. The cooking pot, remarkably, survived intact and was found 30 feet further down the road, coming to rest in someone's front yard like the world's most morbid lawn ornament. Jason did not survive intact. The impact was catastrophic and immediately fatal, the kind of collision that doesn't leave room for hope or heroic medical intervention. His body crumpled at the base of the pole, while his friends sat in the SUV, still processing the fact that their celebration had just transformed into a crime scene. Tyler was arrested at the scene for vehicular manslaughter and driving under the influence, beginning a legal nightmare that would result in a 5-year prison sentence and a lifetime of guilt-induced insomnia. The video on his phone was confiscated as evidence, but would later leak onto the internet, where it accumulated millions of views under titles like "Why You Don't Car Surf" and "Darwin Award Nominee 2024. The comments section became a mix of morbid fascination and genuine public service announcements about physics. Jason's parents, devastated beyond words, eventually established a scholarship in his name, specifically for students pursuing degrees in physics education, hoping that perhaps someone else's child might learn the lessons about momentum, inertia, and the unforgiving nature of sudden deceleration that Jason never had the chance to apply. The light pole still stands at that intersection, now featuring a small memorial cross and flowers that someone replaces every few months. A permanent reminder that the laws of physics don't take holidays, don't accept excuses, and absolutely do not care how epic you think you look. 10. Carbon monoxide is called the silent killer for a reason. It has no color, no odor, no taste, and no way of announcing its presence until your oxygen-starved brain has already started shutting down. It's the kind of danger that requires actual knowledge to avoid, which made it particularly deadly for our final group of contestants who possessed the survival instincts of lemmings and approximately the same understanding of atmospheric chemistry. The setting was a winter camping trip in the Colorado mountains, where temperatures had dropped to 20 below zero, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves with a personal grudge. The group, 5 friends in their mid-20s led by a self-proclaimed outdoorsman named Derek, had rented what they believed was a rustic cabin experience, but turned out to be a glorified tent with a wooden frame. The propane heater provided was, in Derek's expert opinion, pathetic. "This thing puts out like no heat," Derek complained, holding his hand over the small propane unit that was, in fact, operating exactly as designed, providing adequate warmth for a space of its size without producing dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. "We need real heat. Caveman heat. Fire heat." His solution was located just outside, a charcoal grill that the campsite provided for outdoor cooking. The coals from their earlier dinner were still glowing, radiating the kind of primal warmth that the propane heater simply couldn't match. Derek saw this and made a decision that would end all of their lives. "Help me drag this inside," he said. His friends, equally cold and equally ignorant of basic chemistry, complied without question. They positioned the grill in the center of their shelter, then sealed every possible gap where cold air might enter, stuffing towels under the door, taping plastic over the ventilation screens, creating what they proudly described as an airtight seal against the bitter cold. They had, with great effort and enthusiasm, converted their shelter into a gas chamber. The warmth was immediate and wonderful. Within minutes, the interior temperature had risen from freezing to comfortable, and the group settled into their sleeping bags with sighs of contentment. "See," Derek said, proud of his ingenuity. "This is how you survive in the wilderness, none of that propane crap." What Derek didn't understand was that charcoal combustion produces enormous quantities of carbon monoxide as it burns. In an outdoor environment, this gas disperses harmlessly into the atmosphere. In a sealed tent, it accumulates rapidly, binding to hemoglobin in the blood and preventing oxygen from reaching vital organs. The symptoms begin subtly: mild headache, slight confusion, drowsiness. By the time severe symptoms appear, the victim is typically too impaired to recognize the danger or take action. The group fell asleep within 30 minutes, commenting on how drowsy and comfortable they felt. Classic early symptoms of CO poisoning that they interpreted as successful camping. Derek was the last to close his eyes, satisfied that he had once again proven himself the smartest person in any given room. None of them woke up on January 1st. Their bodies were discovered 2 days later by the campsite manager, who noticed that their rental was overdue and found the scene exactly as they'd left it. 5 young people in sleeping bags, arranged around a charcoal grill that had burned itself out sometime during the night. The peaceful expressions on their faces belied the violent cellular death that had occurred as their brains starved of oxygen. The coroner measured carboxyhemoglobin levels exceeding 70% in all 5 victims, a concentration that would have caused unconsciousness within 20 minutes and death within 2 hours. They had essentially suffocated in their sleep, their bodies unable to access the oxygen they needed despite breathing normally. Derek's family later established a foundation promoting carbon monoxide detector use in camping equipment, hoping to prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss. The campsite updated its safety materials to include explicit warnings about indoor charcoal use, though employees privately wondered how such a warning was even necessary. "It's literally basic survival knowledge," one ranger commented. "Every Boy Scout knows this." But Derek had never been a Boy Scout, and his confidence in his own abilities had always exceeded his actual competence. In the end, his final act of genius created a monument not to outdoor expertise, but to the lethal consequences of overconfidence and ignorance. 10 deaths. 10 preventable tragedies. 10 people who prove that confidence without competence is just a slow-motion suicide note. Now here's my question for you savages in the comments. Which death made you physically cringe the hardest? Drop the number below. I'm betting number 4 haunts your dreams tonight. Smash that subscribe button before you do something stupid enough to end up in part 2. Like and hype, if you survived this video with your faith in humanity intact.